On my daughter Luna's wedding day, I overheard her groom whisper to his best man that he'd cheated on her and that he was marrying us for our money. I didn't hesitate. One phone call later, and right before he could say, "I do," the police walked in. The look on Brad's face when the handcuffs clicked made every sleepless night I'd spent digging into his fraud worth it. If you love true cold revenge stories, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I live for hearing from fellow revenge connoisseurs. Now, lean in. Let me rewind 8 months. This wasn't an accident. It was a slow, quiet unmasking, and it started the day Luna came home with the perfect man.
My name is Ellen Smith. At 56, I'd learned 2 useful things: how to read a person's face like a ledger, and how to follow a number trail until it bled the truth. For 30 years, I'd made a living uncovering lies dressed as balance sheets. I suspected that skill would be useful again when Luna walked into my life, eyes bright, hands clammy, and said, "Mom, I met someone. His name is Brad." Brad arrived at our house like a press release: tailored suit, an easy laugh, a hand that stayed light on the small of Luna's back. He knew which jokes to tell and when to look tender. He had the kind of charm that makes people forget to ask questions. At first, I behaved like any proud mother. I fed them both dinner, poured wine, laughed at the right moments. Luna's eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen since she was 6 and found a ladybug on the porch. Love changes people. Love convinces you to overlook small things. But there were small things Brad left in his wake. A dinner paid for by a card that later declined, excuses about temporary transfers, a laugh that came too quickly when I asked where he worked exactly. One evening, months later, Luna stood at my kitchen sink texting, her jaw tight. I glanced at the phone, a flash of a message from Brad. "Trust me, everything's on track." He called himself CEO of a consulting firm. He had LinkedIn, a sleek website, photos of him at conferences. He had all the things a modern success story should have. He also had ways of moving money that felt like tricks I'd seen before. A lot of small, anonymous transfers rather than clean corporate payroll, payments to ghost vendors with names that read like scribbled acronyms. I let the unease sit like a stone on my chest. Then curiosity, the professional kind, took over. If you want to hide money, you bury it under adjectives: consulting, events, programs. If you want to hide a lie in a marriage, you feed it with compliments and charm. But the ledger remembers. I began quietly. First, a routine. Old habits die slowly. I scanned the receipts Luna left on the kitchen counter, the invoices Brad handed me when he fixed a broken pipe in their rental. Nothing glaring, but then I found a small pattern. Every month, on the 5th, a transfer labeled Advance LR Services would clear from a local account Brad used. LR, his initials. The amounts were modest at first, as if to avoid notice. 10,000, then 12,000, then 15,000. Small enough to be plausible, large enough to add up. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Confrontation is a luxury for people who need to blow off steam. For an investigator, confrontation ruins evidence. So I watched and listened and collected. I reached out to an old friend from my auditing days, Maria, who now worked in compliance for a regional bank. I didn't tell her whose account I was curious about. I described a pattern of advance payments and asked how often banks flagged recurring vendor names that didn't appear in public registries. She agreed to glance casually. 2 days later, she texted me, "That vendor doesn't exist in our KYC records. Also, the account routing shows multiple microtransfers to an offshore shell in Malta. Odd." Her last message was, "If you want, I can chat to someone quietly." The thing about being ignored is that it teaches you to be patient. The thing about being suspicious is that it teaches you to be meticulous. I created soft files. I printed screenshots of Brad's website. I printed the registration for his firm. I compiled emails with his invoices. I traced the LR Services transfers and followed them to a small payments intermediary in the EU. It was all deliberate and small, precise enough that a casual auditor would pause, enough to make a prosecutor's mouth water. I arranged a coffee with Luna, The two of us, no phones. She smelled like the lavender shampoo I'd bought her years ago, like youth and trust. "Tell me about him," I said, watching her hands, learning what she omitted. She beamed and told me the story she wanted to tell. The dinners, the late-night work calls, always urgent, the surprise weekend getaways. "He adores me," she said, "and Mom, he's already met your standards. He wants to put a ring on it." She touched the left side of her chest where the ring might sit. "He says he wants to propose by the lake." I let her dream. Mothers learn to be patient with dreams. But at night, I worked. I cross-checked the firm's supposed clients. A glossy brochure listed a string of nonprofits and partner organizations. None of them returned calls. I called vendors listed on Brad's event lists, florists, AV companies. "We never did business with LR Services," a florist told me cautiously. "We never heard of that name." Another supplier forwarded me a single photo from a charity gala, Brad in a tux, hand in the air, but the metadata told me the photo was cropped from a stock event edited. It smelled of image over substance. The cognitive dissonance hums loudest when someone you love collides with someone you suspect. I found myself watching Luna at breakfast, cataloging the small ways Brad shifted her center of gravity. She started deferring to him more. Where to spend the holidays, which doctor to see, which credit card to use. When a fight simmered in the early months, she blamed stress. He apologized with flowers and phrases she loved. That is the classic choreography of charm and control. One rainy Tuesday, a delivery man left a box with their name on the porch. I opened it after they went out. Inside were glossy materials, a legal-looking certificate that claimed a major corporate grant had been secured by LR Services. The certificate had signatures that looked right at first glance. Then I turned it over and saw a tiny typo. The charity's EIN was off by a digit. Clerical error? Or a notch of sloppiness in a house of mirrors? I printed the certificate and walked across the street to the local county clerk. "Do you mind if I ask about this? It looks like a grant award, but the EIN seems wrong." The clerk pulled the file and frowned. "That number doesn't exist. Someone made it up." Her voice was gentle but precise. "People falsify awards to look legit, sometimes to borrow against them, sometimes to pressure donors. When the pattern grows, mistakes become inevitable." I started to assemble those mistakes into a narrative. Phantom vendors, inconsistent EINs, offshore micro-transfers, stock photos passed off as gala proof. I made copies. I time-stamped everything. I compiled an index like I used to compile case files. Then came the night Luna told me Brad had proposed by the lake. I held the ring box, feeling the cool metal of a small diamond press into my palm. He'd planned the whole thing as if the next act would seal everything. A wedding, a new family, a legal merger of assets and names. He expected the quiet of a happy ending. I didn't expect what I did next. I made one phone call to Maria's friend at the compliance unit who owed a favor to a woman who once saved his sister's licensing. I gave a short, calm summary, an offshore trail, phantom vendors, a fake grant certificate. I slid the ring box back into its velvet cradle, my hands steady. "Can you come quietly?" I asked. "You mean now?" she said. "Now," I answered. Because some crimes need no spectacle. They need a clock, a badge, and the right moment to stop someone before he can say, "I do." On the morning of the lake proposal, Brad was confident, radiant. He didn't know that the people he'd taken for granted had been watching. He didn't know that a woman who once balanced impossible budgets could balance a life she loved against a ledger she would not forgive. He'd been playing the long game, sure. Lucky for him, I was playing longer. And as Luna walked toward him under the willow by the water, ring trembling in hand,
The first officer stepped forward. The whisper I heard later, "We have a warrant," sounded small against the rustle of leaves, but to me, it was a symphony. The look Brad made when the handcuffs closed was a kind of truth I'd been waiting for. Shock. Then the slow, raw understanding that charm doesn't immune you from consequences. That handcuff click was not the end. It was the beginning of a story no polished website, no staged gala, no whispered promise could erase. And that story, the one I'd been quietly building for 8 months, had only just begun.
The day after Brad's arrest, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. News travels fast in small towns, especially when a picture-perfect wedding turns into a criminal spectacle. The morning paper's front page had the headline, "Local entrepreneur arrested mid-wedding for fraud and embezzlement," and right beneath it, a photo. Brad in his tuxedo, head down, wrists bound in steel. To everyone else, it was scandal. To me, it was closure. At least, that's what I thought. Luna refused to answer my calls for 2 days. Then she finally texted, "You ruined my wedding. Don't ever contact me again." 8 words. That's all it took to turn 8 months of investigation into an accusation. I sat on my porch swing that night, the cool wind whispering through the trees. The stars looked cruelly calm. I'd imagined Luna crying on my shoulder, realizing I'd saved her from a lifetime with a con artist. Instead, she saw betrayal. Mine, not his. Grief has strange phases. When your child hates you for saving them, it's not anger that hurts most, it's the silence afterward. I spent that week replaying everything. The warning signs, the meetings, the quiet nights combing through Brad's false invoices while Luna laughed in the other room. I didn't regret the outcome, but I regretted how blind she'd been to it. 3 weeks later, I got a visit. Not from Luna, from Detective Aaron Monroe, the same one who'd cuffed Brad at the wedding. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed from too many late nights. "Mrs. Smith," he began, "I thought you might want to know, we traced those offshore accounts. Your instincts were dead on. He wasn't just defrauding companies, he was laundering stolen charity funds." I froze. "Charity funds?" He nodded. "Mostly small education and healthcare grants. He faked nonprofit partnerships, rerouted money through shell entities, then cashed it into personal accounts." I felt the floor tilt under me. "How much?" "Almost $800,000, Monroe said. "He'll be serving a long time." $800,000? Built on other people's hope? Stolen by the man who told my daughter she was her soulmate? Monroe hesitated. He's also naming Luna as a possible accomplice, says she signed financial documents without reading them. My stomach turned to ice. "That's ridiculous." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but it's enough to get her called in for questioning." When he left, I sat in silence. My tea went cold, my pulse wouldn't settle. I didn't just need to protect my daughter emotionally anymore. I needed to protect her legally. So I did what I do best. I opened a fresh file, labeled it Luna Defense, and started from page 1. I tracked every transfer Brad had made. Timestamps, IP addresses, document versions. I dug through his emails, the fake invoices, the proposal letters I'd already copied, and buried in one of his vendor confirmations, I found something that nearly made me laugh. He had forged Luna's digital signature. I called Monroe. "Detective, you'll want to check the metadata on document 47B. The signature timestamp doesn't align with her device log. She didn't sign it. He did, using her old tablet." There was a pause. Then, "You're good, Mrs. Smith." "I'm thorough," I said. "There's a difference." 2 days later, Luna showed up. Her eyes were swollen, makeup smudged, hair tied back like she'd been running on fumes. She stood on my porch, hands shaking. "Mom?" she whispered. I didn't move toward her. Not yet. She burst into tears. "He said you set him up. He said you hated him. But the detective showed me everything. The fake accounts, the forged signatures. I was so stupid." I wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time in months, my daughter let herself collapse into me. "You weren't stupid," I said softly. "You were in love. That's a form of blindness we all suffer once." We stood there for a long time, just breathing, crying, existing. The night air was cold, but the silence was healing. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "What happens now?" I exhaled. "Now we rebuild, but on our terms." That rebuilding wasn't easy. The investigation dragged on. Brad's clients turned out to be a mix of nonprofits and private investors, all victims, all angry. The media swarmed. Luna's face was splashed across headlines next to his. "Bride of a con man," they called her. She lost her job. She moved back in with me, ashamed, broken, quieter than I'd ever seen her. One night, I found her sitting in the dark kitchen, scrolling through comments under one of the news posts. "Mom," she said quietly, "they think I was in on it. They think I helped him." I took her phone gently from her hands. "Luna, you don't owe strangers your truth. You owe yourself peace." She stared at me. "You're not mad?" "Oh, I'm mad, but not at you. I'm mad that men like Brad weaponize charm and that women like you believe love should mean trust without verification." She gave a small, sad laugh. "You sound like a forensic therapist." "I sound like your mother." Weeks passed. The world slowly lost interest in Brad's story. But I hadn't. When the court date arrived, Luna and I sat side by side. Brad walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, still arrogant. When his eyes met mine, that smirk wavered. He mouthed something across the aisle. "You did this." I tilted my head and mouthed back, "You made it easy." His attorney tried to spin the story. A business misunderstanding, a lack of oversight, a miscommunication. But Maria's compliance reports, my documentation, and the digital forensics painted a crystal clear picture. At one point, the prosecutor held up a printed email showing Brad's request to a partner, quote, "Let's keep the Mrs. Smith line quiet. She's sharp, and if she snoops, I'll charm her daughter harder." Luna inhaled sharply. I felt her hand tremble in mine. Charm her daughter harder. That was his strategy. That was his entire con. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled for the first time in 8 months. Luna looked at me through tears. "It's over." I said, "Not yet. He still owes restitution to every charity he stole from, and I know exactly how to make sure he pays it." She frowned. "How?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say some of his assets are about to go to better hands. Because when you spend your life tracing dirty money, you learn how to redirect it, legally." Over the next month, with help from Maria and a nonprofit lawyer, I arranged for part of Brad's frozen assets to be donated back to the victims, the same foundations he stole from. Every last cent went where it belonged. The day the final wire went through, I stood at the lake where he'd proposed to Luna. The water was still, the wind calm. "You know what's funny?" I said aloud. "You thought you were marrying into money. But you ended up funding hope." The sunset caught the surface, gold and red and endless. I felt the weight lift from my chest for good. That night, Luna joined me on the porch again. She looked at me quietly for a long moment. "You always know what to do." I smiled. "No, I just know when not to look away." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you think I'll ever trust again?" I looked up at the stars. "Yes, But next time, you'll make sure love comes with receipts." She laughed softly, and I felt the warmth of something new in her voice. Strength. And maybe that's what revenge really is. Not destruction, but reclamation of power, of peace, of truth. Brad lost everything that day. But Luna, she got herself back. And as for me, I finally slept. By the time the wedding countdown hit 2 weeks, I'd collected enough evidence to write a book titled How to Catch a Manipulative Son-in-Law. But instead of printing it, I decided to let my actions speak for me. Brad's world was about to implode, and he wouldn't even see it coming. The house buzzed with last-minute preparations. White roses filled the hallway, Luna's laughter echoed from upstairs, and soft music played as stylists flitted about. On the surface, everything was perfect, but beneath it, I could feel the tension pulsing like a heartbeat. Every time I saw Brad's smug grin as he barked orders at the staff, something in me twisted. He was acting like he already owned the place. He'd even started referring to my husband's estate as our future family home. Oh, he had no idea just how temporary his future was about to be. 3 days before the wedding, Luna called me into her room. She was sitting at her vanity, wearing a silk robe, her hair pinned up with tiny pearls. She looked radiant, but there was a nervous flicker behind her smile. "Mom, you think Brad really loves me, right?" The question hit me like a dagger. I forced my face into something calm, warm. "Of course, sweetheart. Why would you ask that?" She sighed. "He's been distant, always on his phone. And yesterday, when I mentioned our prenup, he got weird. My heart nearly stopped. Prenup? I'd never heard her mention that before." She twisted her ring nervously. "Yeah, he said we shouldn't need one because we trust each other. But you know me, Mom. I don't want to risk anything. I told him I wanted one signed before the wedding." I smiled, the kind of smile you give when the universe hands you a golden ticket. "Well, I said you're right to protect yourself. Love doesn't erase the need for logic." She nodded, clearly relieved to hear me say it. Little did she know, I'd already slipped a clause into her wedding documents, one that gave her full financial control over any joint assets until the marriage reached its first anniversary. It was my quiet insurance policy. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at my laptop. The folder labeled Brad Evidence glowed back at me. Inside were screenshots, bank transfers, and chat logs between Brad and his business partner. One that proved they'd been embezzling from a small charity under the guise of wedding sponsorship donations. I could take it all to the police right now, but I needed the timing to be poetic. So, I called my friend Daniel, a detective I'd known since my years as a forensic accountant. "Ellen," he said, half amused, half worried, "every time you call, someone ends up in handcuffs. What's going on this time?" I smirked. "Let's just say I've got a groom who's about to have a very bad wedding day." I sent him the folder. Within 48 hours, he confirmed it. Brad and his partner were under active investigation for wire fraud and tax evasion. Wedding day, morning. The sun broke over the vineyard like a dream. Champagne poured freely, the orchestra rehearsed, and every guest looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Luna was glowing. She'd chosen a dress that shimmered like morning dew. But as I watched her from the doorway, my stomach twisted with both pride and sorrow. She had no idea what storm was about to hit. Brad strutted in wearing a custom tux, all confidence and arrogance. He shook hands with guests, flashing that rehearsed charm. He even kissed me on the cheek. "Morning, Mrs. Smith. Ready to gain a son?"
I looked him dead in the eyes and replied, "Oh, Brad, I think you'll find that what I'm ready to gain is closure." He blinked, confused, but I'd already turned away. Hours passed. Guests took their seats under the floral arch. The music swelled. Luna walked down the aisle, her arm looped through her father's, her eyes shining. Brad smiled at her like the perfect groom, but I saw it, the fake glimmer in his eyes, the smug curl of his lips. Then, right before the officiant began, he leaned toward his best man and whispered something that made my blood run cold. Can you believe she actually thinks I love her? Once the joint account clears, I'll be gone. He chuckled. His best man laughed too. And that's when I made the call. I didn't even have to say much, just 2 words to Daniel. Now, proceed. The ceremony had barely reached I do when I saw 2 men in dark suits approach from the back. The murmurs started slowly, a wave of confusion rippling through the crowd. The officiant hesitated. "Is everything all right?" Brad turned around, frowning. "What the—" "Bradley Carter," one of the officers said firmly. "You're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." The crowd gasped. Luna froze mid-step. Brad stammered, "What? No, this is a mistake. This is my wedding." The officers didn't flinch. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and I swear in that moment, time slowed. He turned toward me, eyes blazing. "You!" I met his stare calmly. "You should have read the fine print." Luna burst into tears. I rushed to her, holding her tight as Brad was led away. Her heart broke that day. I could feel it. But I also knew it was better to shatter the illusion now than let her live a lie. That night, I sat in my living room, glass of wine in hand, replaying everything. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was a quiet, heavy peace. Justice had been served, but my daughter's innocence, that was gone forever. Still, I knew one thing for sure. I'd saved her from a lifetime of deceit. And maybe that was the truest form of revenge, not just punishing the guilty, but protecting the ones who didn't even know they needed saving. The morning after the wedding felt eerily quiet. No champagne bubbles, no laughter, no music, just the echo of silence, the kind that follows a bomb blast. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, guests, even distant relatives who'd suddenly remembered my number. Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted gossip. But the only person I wanted to talk to wasn't answering her phone. Luna. When she finally walked into the house that evening, she looked hollow. Her wedding dress was gone, replaced with jeans and one of her father's old shirts. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup still smeared from tears. "Mom," she whispered, voice trembling. "Did you know?" The words hung in the air like a blade. I took a slow breath. "Yes." Her face twisted. "How long?" 8 months. Her jaw clenched. She paced across the kitchen, hands in her hair. 8 months? And you didn't say anything? You let me fall in love with a criminal. "I didn't let you," I said softly. "I needed proof. If I'd told you without it, you wouldn't have believed me. You loved him too much." She turned on me, eyes blazing. "You humiliated me, Mom, in front of everyone. You ruined my wedding." I swallowed hard. "Luna, he was using you. He was stealing from charities. He would have drained your accounts and left you in debt before the honeymoon ended. I didn't ruin your wedding. I saved your life." Her lips trembled, but the anger in her voice burned hotter. "You always think you know best. Always controlling. Always interfering. You couldn't even let me have one thing without making it about you." That one cut deep. I'd spent years protecting her. from bad friends, bad choices, and bad men. But I realized something in that moment. To her, protection had always felt like control. For the next few days, Luna avoided me. She moved back into her apartment, ignored my calls, and blocked my number on social media. The media storm only made things worse. Headlines blared. Groom arrested at altar, bride's mother behind FBI tip-off. Millionaire wedding turns into crime scene. Reporters camped outside my house. One even tried to sneak onto my lawn to take photos. But I didn't care about the headlines. I only cared about the silence between me and my daughter. Then, 3 weeks later, everything shifted again.
It was late afternoon when I got the call. Mrs. Smith, this is Detective Morales. We've uncovered new evidence in the Carter investigation, and I think you'll want to see this. At the station, he handed me a file thick with documents. Inside were text exchanges between Brad and an unknown number. They weren't just about fraud. They were about manipulation, psychological warfare. He'd bragged about breaking Luna down so she'd depend on him. He'd even joked about how her mom's money would pay for their escape to Bali. I felt sick. And then Morales pointed to a final message, one sent the night before the wedding. If anything goes wrong tomorrow, plan B. We hit Ellen's accounts. She's got the real money anyway. He wasn't just going to hurt Luna, he was going to destroy me, too. That night, I printed the messages and drove to Luna's apartment. She didn't open the door at first, but when she finally did, she looked tired, not angry this time, just drained. "What do you want, Mom?" "I need you to read this," I said, handing her the folder. "Then you can hate me all you want." She sighed, flipping it open, and with each page, her expression shifted. Shock, confusion, then horror. When she reached the final text, her knees gave out. She sat on the couch, covering her mouth. He wanted to rob you?" she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, Luna. He wasn't just using you for money, he was planning to take me down too." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time, they weren't for him. "They were never your fault," I said softly. "You just trusted the wrong person." She reached out and grabbed my hand. The first time she'd touched me since that awful wedding. "Mom," she whispered, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I hugged her tight, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry too. Over the next few months, we began rebuilding, not just our relationship, but our trust. Luna threw herself into therapy. I threw myself into making sure Brad's case didn't vanish into bureaucratic limbo. And when the trial finally came, we sat side by side in the courtroom. Brad was thinner now, his arrogance replaced with bitterness. He wouldn't look at us. The prosecutor read every message, every fake donation, every stolen cent. When Luna took the stand, her voice didn't shake once. "He pretended to love me," she said firmly, "but the only thing he ever loved was greed. And my mother, she saved me from that." Brad's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury saw the truth. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Brad's face went pale. He turned toward me one last time as they led him away. "You think you've won, Ellen? You ruined your own daughter's happiness." I met his glare with a calm he'd never understand. "No, Brad. I gave her a second chance at it." He sneered as they dragged him out. But the moment the doors closed behind him, Luna leaned into me and whispered, "You really were playing the long game." Afterwards, we drove home in silence, the sunset bleeding gold over the hills. For the first time, Luna laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and it filled the car like music. "Maybe next time," she said with a smirk, "I'll let you vet the groom first." I smiled. "Maybe next time you'll listen when I say something feels off." She rolled her eyes but squeezed my hand. It wasn't forgiveness in words, it was forgiveness in touch. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Luna started fresh. She moved into a new apartment, opened her own design studio, and slowly learned to trust herself again.
As for me, I went back to my quiet routines, coffee, gardening, and the occasional glass of wine. People still whispered about the wedding that turned into a courtroom drama, but I'd stopped caring. Because in the end, I hadn't just exposed a fraud. I'd reminded my daughter and myself that silence can be powerful, but truth is louder. 3 months after the trial, the house finally felt quiet again. Too quiet. No phone calls from lawyers, no reporters parked outside my gate, no endless nights of worry. Just stillness. But if there's one thing life had taught me, it's that silence often hides unfinished business. And I was right. It started one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office sorting old financial records when an envelope slid through my mail slot. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Printed on it were 5 words that made my heart drop. Brad didn't work alone, Ellen. I read it again. Then again. No signature, no explanation, just that single chilling line. For the next hour, I sat there staring at it, the words burning into my brain. Who could have sent it? Was it a prank? Or was there someone else still out there? Someone who had helped Brad pull his cons? And then my phone buzzed. It was Luna. "Mom, we need to talk." Her voice sounded tight. She arrived 20 minutes later, soaked from the rain and pale as a ghost. "Mom," she said, handing me her phone, "I think you need to see this." On the screen was a bank statement, but not hers. It was from an account in Brad's name that had been frozen after his arrest, except now new transactions were appearing. Money was moving again, tens of thousands of dollars transferred to an account under the name M. Carter. I frowned. M. Carter? Do you know who that is? Luna hesitated. "I think it's Megan, Brad's sister." I blinked. "The one who helped plan the wedding?" She nodded slowly. She was always hanging around, always saying weird things like, "Brad's the smart one, but I handled the details." I thought she was joking. The rain battered harder against the windows. "Oh, Luna," I sighed. He wasn't joking, and neither was she. By morning, I'd made a few calls. Old contacts from my accounting days, people who owed me favors. Within hours, we traced Megan Carter's account. It was offshore, hidden under layers of shell companies, the same technique Brad used to embezzle funds. He might have been behind bars, but Megan was still out there, and she was moving his stolen money. I decided to pay her a visit. She was working at a luxury events firm downtown, the same company that had organized Luna's wedding. The irony made me smile grimly. When I walked in, Megan looked up from her desk and froze. "Ellen, I didn't expect—" "Relax," I said, setting my handbag down. "I'm not here to cause a scene. I just want to talk." She forced a smile. I'm so sorry for what happened. Brad, I cut her off. Brad's in prison, but you're not. Not yet." Her fake smile vanished. I pulled out a folder from my bag and set it on her desk. "You've been laundering his assets. The same accounts, the same patterns. The only difference is you're sloppier." Her face drained of color. "You have no proof?" I slid a single printed sheet across the desk, a transfer receipt showing her account number, timestamp, and signature. "Oh, Megan," I said softly, "you should never leave a digital fingerprint on stolen money." She froze. Her hands trembled. "What do you want?" she whispered. I leaned forward. Simple. You return every dollar Brad stole, every cent, and transfer it into the restitution fund for his victims. Or I go public. And this time I won't stop at the FBI. I'll go straight to the press.
She opened her mouth to argue, but when she saw the cold certainty in my eyes, she deflated like a balloon. "Fine," she muttered, "you'll get your money." By the end of the week, every dollar was returned. The victims, mostly small businesses and charities, received anonymous restitution payments. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt something like peace. Not the fiery satisfaction of revenge, not the sharp sting of justice, but something deeper. The quiet knowledge that the damage was finally undone. A month later, Luna came over for dinner. She looked lighter now, her smile real again. We sat out on the patio with glasses of white wine as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "What, exposing Brad?" She shook her head. "No, I mean everything. The way it all went down, the wedding, the fallout, the chaos." I thought for a long moment before answering. I used to. There were nights I wished I'd stayed silent, that I'd let you find out on your own. But then I remember, silence doesn't protect people, it only protects lies. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I think I understand that now." Then she smiled, a real, bright, confident smile. "By the way, I've been seeing someone, slowly, carefully. His name's Daniel. He's a teacher." "Ah, a teacher, huh? So no yachts, no crypto schemes, no hidden accounts?" She laughed. "Nope, just lesson plans and coffee stains." I smiled. "Sounds perfect." After she left that night, I walked through the quiet house. The wedding photo that had once sat on the mantel was gone, replaced by a picture of Luna and me, arms around each other at her art exhibit. The image of the wedding had symbolized betrayal. This one symbolized survival. I paused by the window, looking out at the stars. For years, I'd believed revenge was the only way to heal, to make things right. But as I stood there in the soft glow of the night, I realized something else. Revenge gives closure, but truth gives freedom. 2 days later, I got one final letter in the mail. It was from Brad. Handwritten, smudged with ink. "You think you won, Ellen, but I'll get out someday. People like me always do." I smiled as I tore the letter in half. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of men like Brad anymore. He'd lost everything that mattered, his freedom, his power, his audience. And me, I'd gained something far more valuable. My daughter's trust, my peace, and a story worth telling. If you ever find yourself betrayed by someone you love, don't waste your energy trying to destroy them. Just expose the truth. Because the truth doesn't need revenge, it is revenge. I'm Ellen Smith, and this has been my story. If you've ever faced betrayal and come out stronger, drop a heartbreak in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because here, every story of pain ends with power.